Hello, I'm Stephen Howard Johnson. Welcome to the Competent America video series, Session 7, in which I will be discussing civic culture. Civic culture, a lot of people would call it public opinion, but to me public opinion is just a momentary temperature taking of a much more enduring quality that I prefer to think of as civic culture. Civic culture is about our responsibilities as citizens, our sense of our purpose for this nation, the governance ideas we have about how our nation should be operated, and so on. Civic culture is a piece of our national culture. It overlaps a little bit with popular culture. It is influenced by ethnic culture, regional culture, and religious culture, but it is an essential part of who we are as an American public. One cannot have a nation as vast as America, with a $15 trillion economy, more than 300 million people, covering 3.8 million square miles, and have an easy time governing something quite so big without a civic culture that more or less glues together the American public and gives us a reasonable sense of shared direction. Well, we might have 2 or 3 different senses of shared direction, but we are still somewhat glued together by our civic culture. The question we will want to ask about civic culture, and I will come back to this, is whether we have the civic culture today that we need to have so that we can become a competent nation tomorrow. Now, civic culture will ask and answer for us several questions. It'll ask and answer history questions. Where do we come from? Who are we as a people? The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the right to vote, all of the parts of our history that go into who we are as Americans become part of our civic culture. Civic culture also addresses individual identity questions. Who am I as a citizen? Who am I as an American? How do I fit into this larger enterprise we call the United States of America? How do I fit into the smaller enterprise, my state of Maryland or any other state? How do I fit into my city? Civic culture helps answer those kinds of personal identity questions. Civic culture also embeds within it stories that help us understand how the world works, or it helps us rationalize the understanding we already have. Some of us have a hierarchical view of life. Some of us have a more egalitarian view of life. Civic culture will give rationalizations to both sets of people on how to see the world. Civic culture helps us sort out how much tolerance we're expected to show, or how much intolerance it's acceptable to show. Because civic culture helps shape our priorities, it becomes a prize to be won. The government wants civic culture on its side if it's running a war bond drive, as it did during World War II. Corporations, if they are doing things that are regarded as controversial, want the civic culture on their side. Both political parties want the civic culture on their side. Activist groups of all kinds want the civic culture on their side. It is a prize that people fight over. It is a prize people invest a lot of money in, trying to win more support from civic culture than other people win. Now, an important element of civic culture is that it is subject to ethical review, just as we as teenagers are subject to ethical review. Does a civic culture encourage a sense of moral responsibility about behaviors? Does it encourage a sense of paying attention to consequences and choosing behaviors that are not going to have harmful consequences? Or is civic culture there to rationalize us when we want to misbehave and we want to ignore the consequences that we have just caused? One can get both possibilities out of a civic culture. In a garden variety sense, there are many human weaknesses that civic culture can encourage if it's a little bit too immature. I spoke of them in the previous session. Jeff Goldblum's comments about rationalization, Claude Rains on telling half lies, the blind men in the elephant parable about partial perspectives and hasty conclusions. All of those weaknesses can either be discouraged by civic culture or they can be promoted by civic culture. In its most extreme and most terrible form, civic culture can even rationalize genocide. The civic culture of the German people during the 1930s and the 1940s rationalized genocide against the Jews. But there are lesser degrees of the same thing we can find in our own history. The civic culture of the American South, from well before the nation was founded, rationalized slavery. It told half lies about slavery. It asked people to see slavery in a very partial sort of way and to draw hasty conclusions about how necessary and important slavery was. Even today, even on a large scale, We run risks of various kinds of vandalism that get covered up by civic culture. Financial vandalism can be covered by civic culture. Social vandalism can be covered up by civic culture. Environmental vandalism can be covered up by civic culture. We are always at risk that civic culture is going to be hijacked by people whose behaviors have harmful consequences and who want us to accept what they are doing. They don't want to be called on the behaviors they're engaged in. Civic culture is always at risk of moving us in a less ethical direction than we should be going in. Now, to the question I began with, is today's civic culture strong enough that it can teach the American people how to be a competent public and that it can help the American people turn our nation into a fully competent nation? My answer has to be no, but you might be surprised by my reasoning. As I see it, there are two kinds of questions that one can ask in a situation like the one we're in. One can ask the what's broken question, and one can also ask the what's missing question. A what's broken question is pretty simple. Suppose someone has a broken arm. Oh, we know what's broken. We know what we have to do to fix it. But suppose you have all the sailors in the British Navy suffering from scurvy. Well, that's not a what's broken problem. That's a what's missing problem. And it turned out the answer was that what was missing was citrus. They didn't have any citrus in their diet, therefore they had scurvy. When they fixed that by introducing lime onto the ships of the British Navy, when the sailors ate lime on a daily basis, the scurvy cleared up. The sailors also became known as limeys. Well, the competent America question is, to my mind, largely a what's missing question. We don't have in our civic culture a set of ideas about what our responsibilities are as citizens. We don't have a sufficiently strong set of ideas about our industry level responsibilities. We don't have the ideas we need about enterprise level responsibilities, and we don't have the ideas we need about setting integrity at scale as our long run standard. If the civic culture had those qualities, it might have the ability to teach us how to become a competent public and develop a competent nation. But as of now, it doesn't. And it's not something that one can fix with a snap of the, that was pretty terrible, with a snap of the fingers. So over this video series, from beginning to end, I think I will be able to give you a reasonable first cut set of answers to the what's missing question. What's missing from our civic culture that, if it were present, would make it possible for America to be a truly competent 21st century nation with a bright future. I think we're going to have a good time. I hope you'll stick with me. Take care.